Peter Roman II, Duke of Bourbon and of Bourbon. Peter Roman II, Duke of Bourbon, 1 December 1438, 10 October 1503 in Moulins, was the son of Charles I, Duke of Bourbon, and Agnes of Burgundy, and a member of the House of Bourbon. He and his wife Anne of France ruled as regents during the minority of Charles Roman VIII of France. Life, marriage, and royal favour. A loyal and capable subject of the crown, Peter earned the grudging respect of Louis Roman XI through his demonstration of the Bourbon family's meekness and humility. Initially, he was betrothed to Marie d'Orleans, sister of Louis, Duke of Orleans, the future Louis Roman XII, Louis Roman XI, who wanted to prevent such an alliance between two of the greatest feudal houses in France, broke the engagement and took measures to bind both families closer to the crown. A marriage between Peter and the king's elder daughter, Anne, was arranged, as was another marriage between Louis of Orleans and Anne's younger sister, Joan. As a mark of his favour, the king forced Peter's older brother John Roman II, Duke of Bourbon, to grant the Bourbon fief of Beaujolais to Peter, who was also given a seat on the royal council. Peter and Anne were married on 3 November 1473. Regent of France and Duke of Bourbon. At the time of Louis Roman XI's death in 1483, Peter was one of the few royal servants to have remained consistently in favour during the king's reign, and it was to him that Louis, on his deathbed, granted guardianship over the new king, Charles Roman VIII. Peter and his wife Anne immediately took up their duties, and began to position themselves as leaders of a regency government. The king was swiftly crowned, preventing the need for a regency government. Instead, the 13-year-old king undertook personal rule of the kingdom, theoretically on his own, but in reality guided by the Beaujolais. Having assisted his wife in the governing of France, in 1488 both were able to begin building up a power base of their own in the Bourbonnais. Anne was already Countess of Guienne, and Peter was Count of Clermont and La Marche, as well as Lord of Beaujeu, but the death of his eldest brother, John Roman II, and the subsequent enforced renunciation of the family rights by his next eldest brother, Charles Roman II, delivered the Bourbon inheritance the duchies of Bourbon and Auvergne, and the counties of Forez and the new Duke and Duchess of Bourbon then proceeded to add to these domains, adding Bourbon-Lancy in December 1488, and trading L'Isle and Jourdain with the Armagnacs in June 1489 for Carlades and Murat. These domains were granted to them by the king in absolute right. They would not revert to the crown, and were not obligated to pass to the next heirs to the Bourbon inheritance. The Bourbon Montpensiers, the Duke and Duchess, could bequeath them to whomsoever they wished. On 10 May 1491, the pair finally acquired an heir of their own, a daughter, Suzanne, and had an earlier pregnancy in 1476, but about this existed contradictory accounts. Some say the baby was miscarried or been stillborn, but others reported that a living son was born, Charles, styled Count of Clermont, in 1488. By 1491, the Bourbon influence over the crown was waning. Charles Roman VIII was an adult now, unwilling to accept tutelage from his family. Against the better judgment of Anne and Peter, Charles chose to renounce his unconsummated marriage to Margaret of Austria, and instead marry Anne, Duchess of Brittany. He then went against them by returning Margaret's dowry Artois and Franche-Comté to her brother, Philip the Handsome. Nor were either able to prevent Charles' disastrous Italian expeditions, although both were left in control of France on several of his absences. Both continued to be major figures in the court for the rest of Charles Roman VIII's reign, but restricted in power. After Charles Roman VIII's death and the accession of Louis Roman XII, Peter largely retired from court politics and devoted his few remaining years to his family, being particularly devoted to his daughter Susan. Succession to the Duchy of Bourbon. Without surviving male issue, the next heir to the Bourbon duchy was Susan. It was in the question of the future of Susan and the Bourbon territories that Peter and Anne found themselves opposing each another in his final years. With Charles Roman VIII dead, and the more cautious Louis Roman XII on the throne, Susan needed a husband to support her in her inheritance, which risked being disputed by the crown and the Montpensiers. The Duke and Duchess had initially groomed the next Bourbon heir, Louis of Bourbon Montpensier, as a son-in-law, but he mortally offended Peter by condemning letters patent of Louis Roman XII, which confirmed Susan's rights of inheritance having been wrung from him as the price of Bourbon support upon his accession. Peter then decided to betroth Suzanne to Charles Roman IV, Duke of Alencon, a favourite of Louis Roman XII, and so likely to protect the duchy against royal encroachment and Montpensier challenges. This contract was signed on 21 March 1501 at Moulins, Charles being 11, Susan 9. Before this marriage could be completed, however, Peter died of a fever. Following this, and arranged for Suzanne to marry the next Bourbon heir male, Charles of Bourbon Montpensier, Louis of Bourbon Montpensier having died the year before, thereby averting a succession dispute over the Bourbon inheritance, which the young pair inherited jointly. Family tree, references